Hello everyone, welcome back. Fresh off of playing some Lorcana over the weekend here. I am in full swing, ready for the Disney Lorcana Challenge, or I guess North American Championship Challenge, whatever you want to call it, January 10th and 12th. While that's still about 3 weeks away, that time is going to fly. It is the holidays. I know myself, I'm going to be busy, and there may be a week where I'm not able to do too much content, probably the week before I'm going to be out of the state, so away from my ability to do that. But you'll have a write-up of kind of more thoughts if there's any more information gained. But yeah, we're ready to go. There's nothing really left to do. We had a very large event at the Charlie's Collectible Show. Kudos to them, 10K, which I happened to win, which was very fun to play in and also see what people had cooked up, any kind of new deck ideas, any kind of existing ones that got some upgrades. It was a lot of fun to go through and to play. I had an awesome time with all the people at 20 Lore Pro. Fantastic group of guys and gals, and so much fun hanging out with them and dinner on Friday night and Saturday night. And yeah, if you haven't made it out to one of those, I would suggest doing so. I think they had the voice actress from Arcane there who played Powder. I'm really bad with names, sorry. And I didn't get to beat them. I had a flight to catch, but it was a ton of fun getting to see some people like that there. And yeah, great weekend overall. But let's have enough of that. I'm going to go into as much detail as I can, as well as go through a bunch of mulligans here with the deck I played to win. One deck I think you're probably going to see at the LCQs and the challenge itself. So Diggy Hole updates. Yeah, it's an update to what we've been doing. I wasn't joking when I said I think that all I really needed to do is add Kita to the deck. I went up to 4 after playing it with a few times, just to make sure that I play tested it and drew it when I, wanted to, and when I had to, really. But yeah, this deck has been performing quite well. It is finally capable of beating Ruby Sapphire pretty consistently, I think. I played against it 4 times, and I won every single time. The match, they're best of 3. I 2-0'd it twice, and I 2-1'd it twice, so give or take, it's not the most advantage, but it's still advantage. They can definitely win going second. I can definitely win going second as well. That definitely happened during the tournament. In the 2-0s, you'll see. Actually, I don't know if I lost going first, in all honesty, but I definitely won going second, so there's something to that at least. But yeah, you've seen the deck list. You've seen variations of it. I think I went over that in the previous video. To this kind of decks to expect, or decks that you could see playing for the European National Championships. Yeah, this is where I ended up with. I think I'm going to go through kind of how I view the deck and how I think it can adapt going forward. Because really, the deck was built for that weekend. When I build decks, they're not. Decks and the metagame are always volatile. There's never a stale moment where you can just kind of sit back and keep doing the same exact thing over and over again. You can do similar things, but we've seen even decks like Ruby Amethyst adapt over the year, from last year to this year, and so on and so forth, just with how they've had to change their decks, change what they're trying to attack and how they're trying to react at the same time. And yeah, we are here. So let's go through again. I like to break down the deck into a bunch of different ways to view it, really how to see it as a whole, and how to understand what the cards in the deck are doing. That does allow for some modifications to what you think the deck may need more of or less of, if you kind of see what their roles are and how to adjust. So let's start off here with kind of what most decks need in the game. I don't think we've seen a deck do very well without some of it. Removal. This deck doesn't have any lacking of it. 12 pieces of removal. Let's Storm Rage on, Strike the Raging Fire, and 7 Dwarves Mine. Cinderella lumped in there because its primary job is to sing one of those 8 songs, and while 8 isn't a terribly large amount for a card's functionality, it is ink, of course, and still one of the best 1-drops, if not the best 1-drop in the game. Still. Just the ability to leverage a huge ink advantage going 1 to 3. Impressive. I would never cut a single one of these cards. Never. Really, if you're playing Amber and Steel, I don't think you can actually ever get away from Cinderella and let the Storm Rage on and Strength Raging Fire. I think those 3 cards are how every single Amber Steel deck has to start. Otherwise, I think you're playing the wrong color pair for what you're trying to do. Just because of what they're able to do, the efficiency and the amount of games you'll just win by leading on a turn 1 Cinderella, even if you may not even have the song to go with it. The amount of times I played it and then my opponent just didn't play anything on turn 1 just to avoid getting stormed, but I didn't even have it. It does happen. The amount of times I've had them play into it, I think No I'm Not, Kendall Bernadette, played into it, and I had Storm in our first game we played. I'm going to see if I can get the links for those videos added to this. I think the 20 Lore Pro Discord has some of them. I know they're editing some of all of Kendall's matches. That's why we weren't the main feature in the semifinals, because it was going to be up there anyway. But yeah, he played into it, and I had to have two Storms on just turn 1 and 2, and it's kind of catastrophic in a lot of ways, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do and hope it works out. And even the best players will just get stormed on turn 2. Sometimes hard to avoid, myself included. Sometimes Amber Steel is about who develops their Cindy and maintains it first, because yeah, going first usually gives you, people complain about who goes first is advantage because they get to use their ink first. Is what really happens. So when Cinderella is playing a 3-cost card on turn 2, you got to use essentially 4 ink worth of things on turn 2, not to mention whatever you play on turn 2. So 6 ink by turn 2 is way better than someone who's going second who maybe only used 3. It compounds pretty quickly. But yeah, these are cards pretty sacred to the deck. The Seven Dwarfs Mine working with knights. There's not really many other knights in the game that work with it. And it's important to know how to use Seven Dwarfs Mine. I think I made a mistake in one of the matches in day 1, not moving a dock back to it, that it was there initially. I moved to the other one, and I just forgot that I could move it back to the same one. For some reason, that was already used up in my mind. The turns blended together or something, so I ended up using a strength. It was a mistake. I do dwell on my own mistakes because I feel like I hold myself to a higher standard than most when it comes to something like that, because I know I'll criticize those who make mistakes that are pretty obvious, and I'm glad I make the obvious mistakes, however, not the more complicated ones more often than not, so there's something to that as well. But yeah, these are kind of the core of the deck. The removal pieces are integral. They're hard to maneuver. I don't know if we need more or less. I don't think less is ever the answer. The only thing you could potentially do is remove a Seven Dwarfs Mine, but you saw 2 of them if you've watched the videos of the event. It can be devastating for any deck that can't immediately answer a location or all your characters, or cares about having characters in play. Really just, there was I think a match I played where I was able to machine gun down an entire board of things just over the course of 2 turns by playing a mine out, having one second one out, and moving one there, shooting something for 2. They couldn't stabilize, so just moved back and forth a couple times with 2 dwarves, and it was all she wrote at that point. But yeah, this package here, kind of the key to the deck being able to win going second as well. Cinderella is one of the best cards to help going second. And one of the biggest draws to playing Amber Steel is the ability to win going second so consistently because of things like this. But let's move on. Where would we be if not for how this deck is different than traditional Steel Song? I don't like to call this deck Steel Song. I don't like to call this deck Amber Steel, much of anything. I just call it either Diggy Diggy Hole, but short, just the mine. Amber Steel Mine is an easy way to do it. But this is kind of what differentiates it in a lot of ways. This is the offensive cards. Not offensive in an egregious way, but offensive is they're playing really good offense. There are 19 cards which kind of fill that role of the aggression. Daisy is unparalleled as far as how aggressive it can be, how resilient it can be, but it can also have, there is quite a drawback. It is a card that I do like to have more often than not when going first. When going second, I really don't like it. Unless I'm using it strictly as a control card in matchups like Amethyst Steel or mirror matches where we're trying to poke at each other's characters to then use Rapunzel effectively. Daisy can be a liability in a lot of cases. Sometimes questing with it as early as turn 2 can be a mistake. Just them hitting an extra character lets them curve out a lot better going first, so that they don't have to worry about running out of cards or ink. They can just keep deploying. And yeah, definitely a tricky card to use, understand how to use it. But I think in the finals I had triple Daisy. That was the only time I had, I think, even double Daisy. I don't think I played 3 1-drops most of the tournament, because typically you want to space out your cards in a way that you make sure you don't run out of ink, get to at least 4 ink before emptying your hand, so you can kind of push past certain points of the game if your aggressive plan doesn't work out too well. But yeah, Daisy, enough said, really. Lilo, same deal here. There's a slight slant for Lilo over Piglet, even though Piglet can be quite good, especially when paired with Smee, just being able to keep it alive, the resiliency of it, making it a captain so that Smee doesn't take extra damage. Amazing. Piglet, the most aggressive character pretty much in the game. It's a 2 lore, 3 quester, or 2 cost, 3 lore character, and that's just what it is. And that's kind of crazy to think that that's actually what the text is, because there's never a case where I think I've ever had a Piglet where it didn't quite quest for a bunch. I think actually one time, maybe in the finals too, I think I had to use on turn 4, play a Dwarf Mine and move it to stop a Sisu shift line. But that being said, it's I could have played essentially a character out to make it quest for 3 if I was so inclined. Super strong card, Lilo and Piglet. You always want 4 Lilos in the Mine deck if you're playing a more traditional Steel Song. I could certainly see only playing 3. A Hole in the World lets you see a lot more cards than you can with this deck, so that you're more likely to see 1 or even 2 copies with a Hole in the World in your deck than you are without. So I'd totally excusable to play less than 4 if you're playing a Hole in the World. Smee has been a mainstay for Amber Steel and Steel pretty much in general since set 2. The most aggressive card that dodges Brawl, as well as self-damaging for Rapunzel, or set 3, not 2. And yeah, Smee is just almost a card you almost always want to keep. I think with a 1-cost card in your hand of any kind, I think Smee is on my do not mulligan list. I'm still figuring that out as far as any kind of spreadsheet I can give for matchups and how to mulligan with this deck. I'm getting a little bit more familiar with it. It is difficult, and I will say the last list I put out for the more traditional Steel Song right before Las Vegas, the DLC there, that was a culmination of probably 6 months of playing Amber Steel Song traditionally, how to figure out exactly what is on my do not mulligan list, period. It's a little more straightforward there than it is here. This deck is highly contextual, play versus draw, as well as matchups, as well as the rest of the hand, for a bevy of reasons, really. But I think Smee might end up on that list, assuming there's a 1-cost card. But even not, it might be even on that list just to keep and mulligan the rest of the 6 cards. But we'll see. We're going to do some mulligans towards the end of the video, once we go through the bids here. And Lawrence is also just the best 3-drop. Amber Steel pairing doesn't have very many good 3-cost characters. I've considered everything under the sun for being a 3-cost character to play. Lawrence is by far the best one, in conjunction with the card we'll see later, of course, in the deck, by the same artist. Funny enough, Lawrence and Pete. But yeah, Lawrence is fantastic. It's really good bait for Rapunzel. People want to ping it to make sure it's shrunk so that it can't challenge anything, so they sometimes put like a point into it even when they can't finish off. Gets Rapunzel, then can challenge. It's great. Lawrence is amazing. So this is what we're using to primarily win the game. The name of this game is to play as much lore to the board as you can, as quick as you can, and this is, in this color pair, as efficiently as you can do it, really. You can't really get much better. There could be an argument for playing another Piglet just to help into Ruby Sapphire. I think that I'd prefer to have just another 1-cost character if that was the case. I was funning there just to make sure I hit. I think maybe 1 copy of the 1-cost Lilo could go into the deck, just as an additional 1-cost 2-lore threat before I'd play a 4th Piglet, potentially. I haven't really delved too much deeper into any kind of changes quite yet, but more so just the heart of the deck. And removal and offense wouldn't really be much of anywhere without a little bit of defense, right? So why do I categorize these cards as defensive? Well, because they're primarily some of the better cards you have to either protect the lead or catch back up in a lot of ways. So there's been a lot of huffing and puffing in my mind as well about Calhoun. It was an amazing card. It is an amazing card. It's the best card to play on turn 2 going second, I think, almost in the game. It's just incredible at how good it is at kind of stalling a board out. It's good into Cinderella's from an opposing type of mirror match or even just Steel Song. Hard to remove, doesn't get by Storm, doesn't get hit by tons of things. Trades up into Fox, into Rabbits. Doesn't quite hit Genies, but it could with the Hero's Bow if you play that in your Blue Steel decks, maybe. But yeah, Calhoun is an incredible card. Really turns the tide of how your opponent has to play around it. Isn't as vulnerable to steel removal as other decks or other cards, and sometimes, yeah, it gains you more lore than it should just by challenging. If they're trying to race you and they really are just throwing, their caution to the wind and questing with everything, you can definitely orchestrate a lot of situations where Calhoun's gonna probably just trade and be a situational 2-cost super goof in a lot of ways that deals 3. With a one-time kind of effect of just trading off with a Maui that might have challenged just me, that they shrunk with an ice block or something to only have 2 damage on it, and use Calhoun to finish it off. It's not a great exchange, but hey, it's something. Happy I classify as a defensive card. It does work well with Dwarven Mine, of course, to pair with the removal side of things. But Happy really is its really main goal in the deck is to help give some pause to Diablo. And if you don't expect a lot of Diablo, which I played against one deck with Diablo, I think. It was a Ruby Emerald kind of discard Ruby Robin Hood deck with Maui Shark. Really cool deck. They had like all enchanteds too. It was kind of a sick deck. I would love to see that list just to take a peek. Prince John, Curse Merfolk, Flynn Rider even. But yeah, I'd love to see that deck. But that was a cool deck to see, and Happy certainly helped at checking some of the early Diablos there. They didn't have as good of removal as Steel would have provided them if they're playing green Steel versus red green. But Happy definitely pulls its own weight Happy in conjunction with Dwarven Mind being played from hand can take out an Exerted Genie, dealing 2 by moving the Dwarven Mind there, and then having Happy challenge into it. One thing to do sometimes with this deck is play a Dwarven Mind on turn 2 into a Cinderella that maybe they can't challenge very well. They don't have much will or strength in play. Then on turn 3 you can play Happy and then shoot down a opposing Cinderella 1, even going second sometimes. Not always the greatest because probably hands can be full of songs and you don't really do too much impactful to the board on turn 1 or 2, but hey, it's something to kill it. Pete, I don't think much needs to be said about Pete. Pete is irreplaceable and completely devastating when timed correctly. It can just be a 3/3 for 3, and yeah, I played it so many times just on turn 3 because I just wanted a 3-cost card to sing my songs I didn't have a Cinderella for, and I wanted to play it to sing Storm on itself to then Rapunzel it. I've done everything under the sun with Pete, and Pete is just a card that I'm so glad exists in the game, much like Ursula 2, as a way to disrupt decks that rely too much on actions, play more to the board as, definitely a deck or a strategy that people underutilize. I think just having characters exchange, it's more of the spirit of the game in a lot of ways, and a ton of fun. Pete is glorious. Pete is great. Would never cut that card, really. Next up is Pluto. Pluto did, I would say, probably based off matchups, but underperformed quite a bit in the tournament, in all honesty. I did play against Ruby Sapphire 4 times in 11 rounds of play. I played 11 rounds. I played all 8 rounds on day 1 and 2 in the Swiss, and the top 8. Played against Ruby Sapphire 4 times, so it's over a third of my experience was against Ruby Sapphire. It's not great there, mainly because they don't tend to try and use Maui as much anymore to challenge boards. And if they do, they can use an Ice Block to shrink it so it doesn't kill off the Maui. And it's just a not very good, effectively Lord character. And all the Amethyst decks that can challenge into it just have a bunch of super cheap kind of ways that can ping it off and then kill it. It can be very powerful. I think Ruby Amethyst is probably where it shines the most. But in any kind of Dwarven Mind mirror match, it can be a little embarrassing because Dwarven Mind just kind of nullifies the 4 strength pretty easily. Along with Storm, of course, and any other small little Lilo that you can throw into it to then challenge into. But it's a fine card. I don't know if I'd ever cut it completely, but it definitely shaved on the numbers of Pluto's to make room. I don't want to put too many cards into this slot, the defensive slot, really, of the deck. It does kind of weaken your overall game plan. And you only saw 19 cards dedicated to really being aggressive as far as multiple lore threats. Only about a third of the deck does that pretty effectively. But the main reason I think Pluto's gotten a lot worse is because Kita. Kita is incredible. There are so many games, especially going second, where Kita just wins the game on the spot when played. The reason I say going second is because this deck can create kind of board stalls pretty quickly with your opponent, and eventually they will take over. They will be a little bit more beefier to the board. They'll eventually be able to leverage their card draw with cards like Genie and Rabbit to take over and use removal to then kind of poke holes to where you can't race in any kind of way, and always have to be prepared to kind of back it up in a lot of ways. What Kita lets you do is have those board stalls be broken by you instead of them in their removal. You have a board stall of some capacity, maybe, a Smee, Daisy or 2, Lawrence or something, and they have a bunch of Foxes and Genies, and they can play an Elsa and then just tap something down and start going to town on your board. But if you can lead that whole situation off by just playing a Kita out and quest with everything, maybe up to double digits of some kind, because all your characters are so efficient at questing, then you really can just swing the game in a single turn and make it so that they don't have enough removal to really answer your threats from hand, and their characters can't do anything, and you just immediately end the game. That happens a lot in Amber Steel mirror matches as well, because people don't want to quest too much into Rapunzel's. Rapunzel is one of the key cards in any kind of mirror match if Doc isn't being utilized, and Rapunzel is always the card you want to utilize first if you can, and really kind of get the most out of your Rapunzels. I think anyone who's playing Amber Steel, even Amber Steel songs in the past, will tell you usually someone who can utilize Rapunzel first is heavily advantaged. Just a whole ton of cards coming through, and sometimes getting your opponent to challenge into your board to when you can then Rapunzel properly is a big strength, knowing what they will or won't do, how they can impact the board, knowing if they have Fox to then mitigate your ability to challenge back. There's a ton of play to the deck, and Kita really, again, helps swing the game in a way that you only saw cards like Rapunzel do when people made mistakes in the past, or your opponent playing a bunch of removal eventually draws into with all their card draw, and then you can't really do too much because you don't have as much removal as they might, or sweeping removal, like Be Prepared. But yeah, this is really most of the deck here, the last little bit, is the draw power. Any kind of card draw you have, Doc and Rapunzel. They are both among the best ways to draw cards in the entire game. Rapunzel's been with us since set 1, Doc since set 5, and I now own a lot more Docs than I used to. The ones I were playing with were signed by Wonderland himself. Nice enough to send me a set just to have, and those are the ones I used. It was great. And yeah, these are kind of how you have some staying power in the game. Rapunzel's kind of hard to utilize sometimes against a skilled opponent in general, because they'll know not to expose themselves so that you can maybe peter out and they can take over with some of their more expensive cards. But you also have a lot of ways to enable it yourself. I've stormed my own cards more than I've probably stormed my opponents in this past tournament, specifically because of the amount of Ruby Sapphire I played against. But I would never cut Rapunzel. I would never want to remove that from my deck. I think more often than not, you're trying to, if you had to pick between two in your opening hand, I would lean towards Doc, trying to essentially sculpt a game plan out of your opening hand, maybe keeping up to 5 or 6 cards even, just to make sure that you have, requisite number of cards to ink, play out, and then kind of play Doc to cap it all off and move forward. But yeah, not much to say about these cards. These are how you have some staying power and keep on keeping on with the deck. And really, again, the deck is just a well-oiled machine of aggression and some control elements. And really, really, again, hard for me to argue with my own result in a lot of ways and how I feel about it going forward. I don't really know if anything I would change. Maybe you can trim a Calhoun and maybe you can trim the Plutos and it gives you some room for something. But what that something even is, I would be very cautious about what I want to put into the deck. The curve is very tight. I would want to only really include cards that cost 1 or 3 maybe. Maybe some copies of, John Silver, the 3/3 that shuts down an opponent from challenging for a turn for one of their characters. That's also a captain for Smee. Maybe something like that, but again, very cautious to remove or add cards to the deck. I think this is about as good as I can get it consistently, and consistency is a huge deal, especially when playing in a tournament where you have to win all 5 rounds, such as the North American LCQs or Continentals itself, where you're trying to win every game you can. So don't expect too many changes in the near future, and this is definitely a list I could settle on and see being good even through another set. Maybe just get some improvements here and there with what it gets to play on turn 1 or 2. If we ever get a better card than Daisy, I don't even know, but yeah, we'll see. But I did say, again, we're going to go on here. I think this is the right slide. Yep, some mulligans. So I have some hands here. I have it up on Dreamborn. We're going to go through. I have not looked at these hands yet. This hand specifically, as you can see, is kind of live. I can do whatever. So fundamental rules. You need a 1-cost card. That's kind of the biggest fundamental rule. I don't really want to violate that ever. It is just something you have to have going first or second in pretty much every matchup. You're an aggressive deck. While it's always important to have cards that cost 1 in your hand, this one you really will see a big difference whether or not you have one or not. That's an argument certainly again for more cards that cost 1 in your deck, but I think maybe 1 more is sufficient. 12 is probably enough. 13 is very safe. So we're at 11 right now. It wasn't too big of a deal. I think I missed on her 1 play maybe 1 or 2 times throughout the tournament, which is pretty good. And I could have been more aggressive in those situations to ensure I had 1. Probably still keeping cards, maybe 3 cards in some situations, just to make sure I had a good 2 and a 3, and just missed. But it happens. I could have easily hit and not had a recollection of that kind of thing at all. So here, what do? Well, we have a 1 cost, and we have probably our best 3 costs, and I really do like these. And I did say we kind of always want a card draw effect, whether it's Doc or Rapunzel. Again, I don't really care which, and I always prefer Doc in a lot of ways. And I will say I don't like to have them both together. And also when I do have Docs, one of the things I try and prioritize in the mulligan decision is not drawing more cards by mulliganing more cards. I don't want to go say, okay, I have a good 1, a 3, a Doc, and a Lilo. I can get rid of the rest. I don't really want to do that because I likely have to ink one of these. And again, I'm playing 16 on inkables. It's pretty high. And I don't want to give myself more opportunities to draw more copies of Doc. I want them to come later. So having 4 copies of Kida, I think it's fine to keep 1 for ink. 7 Dwarfs Mine can be hit or miss, but I really don't want to ink both my Lilos or even one of them. They can be very, very strong in certain matchups. My inclination with this hand, especially when going first blind, I'd probably just keep something like this, basically saying this is going to be ink. This or this could be my turn 2 play. I'm much more likely to play Lilo than I am to play a Dwarf Mine on turn 2. Dwarf Mine's not necessarily the most aggressive card, and it doesn't really combo very well with Daisy in kind of general. Daisy and 7 Dwarfs Mine contradict each other is what they try and do. Daisy really aggressive and gives your opponent cards. This is trying to use extra ink you have and a plethora of kind of available resources to then kind of control the board. So Daisy and Seven Dwarfs Mine do kind of clash fundamentally. But yeah, I think I would do this. We'd mulligan our card and strength, sure. Be inclined in a lot of cases here to ink the strength on turn 1, player happy. I typically don't mind inking a strength on turn 1, because if I draw a second song and they have an Ursula, I can't get rid of both if I didn't ink the first one on turn 1. So that's always something to consider here. And yeah, Lilo or Seven Dwarfs Mine, it would very much depend on what happens there. And we can ink the Kita even instead of the strength if we're not playing against Emerald, and kind of go from there. We'll see how it plays out. But yeah, let's do another mulligan here. Okay, so this one is a little bit different. We definitely will never keep 2 docks, so I'm going to just get rid of that pretty easily. Double Daisy is quite nice. It's really only beneficial if we are finding a third 1-drop. Otherwise, a 2-drop will be better than the second Daisy most of the time. And that's pretty difficult to do, to understand like how that's going to work out. I think in the finals I had triple Daisy on the play. I only kept 1 Daisy. I happened to draw one on my mulligan, then one for my first draw step. I was quite lucky in that situation. But I'm not terribly inclined to keep both Daisies to start. They are my forced plays, and depending on the matchup, even when going first, they might not be what I'm looking for all the time, just because my opponent can then answer a lot of what's going on more often than not. My inclination here would be to do something like this. I don't really like keeping strength. It's a really good card to draw into later. And I don't really want a second Daisy because it's making my uninkable count pretty high. I like keeping Lawrence, because again, going first is just the best card to play on turn 3. I always want to keep some form of card draw, and a dock is fine to keep here. So I'd probably do something like this. I know I'm keeping 2 uninkables in my hand, but I'm also putting back 2. So essentially from the remaining 53 cards in my deck, there's only 12 uninkables to draw into here. So I think I would do this on the play for sure. On the draw, I did mention I don't really like Daisy on the draw, right? That is still not as important as making sure you have a 1-drop. I don't really like playing Daisy on the draw because I don't really want to quest with it too often, giving my opponent on the play more resources. But I'm still going to keep a Daisy on the draw, even if, just to make sure I have a turn 1 play. You need to have a turn 1 play the best you can. So yes, I still will keep Daisy even if I don't want it going second on the draw. If it's my only 1-cost character. If I had, say, a Daisy and a Cinderella, I'd probably just get rid of the Cinderella, or get rid of the Daisy if I was going second here. If this was Cinderella and Daisy, I'd just get rid of the Daisy and keep the Cinderella. Maybe keep a strength, but depending on the matchup, maybe not. But yeah, I would keep something like this. Mulligan, okay, this hand is perfectly fine. Kita, again, it's probably going to be ink most of the time, so I can go Kita into Calhoun off of Lawrence or Lilo, depending on what the matchup is. If Lilo's not typically very good against steel decks, so I could see inking it even on turn 2. These are my first 2 inks into Calhoun. I have Lawrence, then Doc plus something else to then curve out. So yeah, this worked out pretty fine going second. Even going first, we would have kept a similar hand. Calhoun, again, this is probably a good example of why I don't like Calhoun as much as I might want to. I might want to shave down to 3, just because I don't want it to clog up my hand when going first. So yes. 1 second here. Let's do a new deck. Or new hand, I should say. Sorry, my vacuum is still going. So let's say we're going first. This is about as good as you could hope for going first, in all honesty. Yeah, I think there's a slim chance I'm playing both Lawrences out, because I think my turn 4 is going to be double 2-drop. I think this is going to be a 1 into turn 2 Smee, into turn 3 either Lawrence or something else. Going first, this is about as aggressive as I could put. If you look back to the thing here, offensive cards, there is pretty much all of them in this hand. We're just missing a Lilo, but yes. This hand is quite good for aggression. I don't want to dig towards removal. I never really want to dig towards removal cards because there are so many of them, and essentially if I think of it that way, I have Strength, Storm, Dwarven Mine, and Dock to draw to. That's 16 cards from my opening hand. I'm probably from this hand going to mulligan 1 card. It might be the second Piglet or the second Lawrence. There is an argument if you really feel the need, if you know this is an aggressive matchup, say Amber Steel or Amethyst Steel, I might get rid of these 2. But in a vacuum when going first, I'd want to be as aggressive as possible. But I could definitely see getting rid of these, knowing the matchup's going to involve a lot more back and forth. And let's just assume that we know we're playing against Amethyst Steel. So Purple Steel, we know we're playing against that for whatever reason. I don't think it's the best deck. It's not a bad deck, but it's not the best deck. And we do that. Hey, look, Storm and Strength. Perfect. I still would probably ink the Strength on turn 1 just to play around potentially Ursula. I guess we can't play on Ursula, and we'd have a turn to decide before then, so probably get rid of maybe the Piglet or the Happy. Probably the Happy. Play Daisy, then Smee, Lawrence, and then Sing. Perfect hand to then Rapunzel. If you can go 1, 2, and 3, and then on turn 4, you can either Storm your Lawrence or Strength your Lawrence for the same amount of cards, because this draws a card, which is the third point that you get from healing with Rapunzel anyway. So storming and strengthening your own Lawrence for an extra card when you're going to Rapunzel it doesn't really make a difference, just to note. Strength is probably when you're not going to use, you're probably only need to deal 2 versus 3 because you drew the card anyway from the Storm to begin with. So yes, you could in theory use the Strength to then draw 3, and then the Storm will then draw another card later, but I've always leaned towards holding the Strength if I can to deal with something problematic, like Genies. Yes, so let's get another one here. So here is a good example of a hand. Let's assume we're against Ruby Sapphire. All right, against Ruby Sapphire, and we're going first because we're lucky and we're going first. Because on the draw, it doesn't really change too much in all honesty. I don't think I want these defensive cards. The rest of the cards are pretty great, right? This is a pretty great hand into Ruby Sapphire. There's a lot of aggression here, and yeah, it definitely is a lot of staying power. However, we don't have a 1-cost card. This is a tricky one for sure. My inclination is that we could take a bit of a gamble going second. Leading on Smee into Lawrence is very strong, hard for them to deal with regardless of what they're doing. And then turn 4, we can then play 2 Piglets or play a Lilo and a Piglet depending on how our hand develops. That is quite strong. It is kind of hard to imagine a world where we don't do something like that or don't really want to do something like that. It's pretty threatening. On their turn, let's say 5, they can have ramped 1 or 2 times. 2 times means they could be prepared us the turn we play the 2 Piglets out, which is poor. 1 time means that they can Medusa us or Maui us on that turn when we play the Piglets out. But I still think it's kind of worth keeping a good amount of things here. You could, in theory, if you wanted to just say, hey, I'm okay with this hand not having a 1-cost card, which is not ideal, but is okay. You could keep this Pluto for strictly ink, because it's not a great card in the matchup. Sure, it can defend against a Maui at times, yeah, but it's not my cup of tea for wanting to do that. But I think I would err on the side of mulliganing like this, keeping some cards to potentially be inked, but still digging a little bit for the 1-cost card. And whether or not it works out really is debatable, but I think, yeah, digging 3 cards, we could be more aggressive. I think in a lot of instances I would get rid of the Lilo if I want to be more aggressive. I think this is about as aggressive as I would go to find a 1-cost card. The reason I would keep the Piglet over the Lilo, even though in blue-red, being able to recur your Lilo is more important, is I think that this Piglet might be ink, and I really don't want to have to ink a Lilo, so I'm going to keep the Piglet potentially to be ink. Otherwise, if I draw a Calhoun, which again, not great in the blue-red matchup, but very good elsewhere, it's kind of what my logic would be. And something like that. There's the Calhoun, which is going to be unfortunate. Here, we're probably leading on inking the Piglet, knowing the matchup. And depending on how things work out, the Rapunzel may or may not be able to be used. Calhoun is probably going to be played. I would still prefer not to play it on turn 2, probably on turn 4 if possible, but it would really depend on what our first draw step is. Let's just say the next hand that we have is going to be our first 2 draw steps, so we can kind of reevaluate from there. But yeah, right now our draw step hopefully is a 1. If not, we're inking some inkable to play nothing, and then Smee into Lawrence into Calhoun plus Lilo is my guess, or Rapunzel if we can get that off, but yeah, we would have missed on 1s for quite a while, unfortunately. But eventually found a dock, so it would have been fine. All right, so this hand here, similar to how I feel about it in general, I don't like keeping Rapunzel and Doc. It's more often that you're going to be able to use Doc, especially when going first, than Rapunzel. It's still more likely going second, but Rapunzel can be good too there. But it's harder to use when you're on the back foot is really what it is. Much easier to use when your opponent's having to engage with you versus anything else. This hand is pretty solid. I would probably, even though I have the Cinderella, I don't really want to keep a song, honestly. It's not my game plan. I just want a 1-cost card. I think I would do something similar to this and kind of just hope it works out. Maybe get rid of Rapunzel. You could keep this if you know you're playing a matchup where you want to storm something, but keeping both Doc and Rapunzel is a bit risky. I wanted to dump my hand and do something like that for sure. Yep. Probably lead on inking a Mine, playing a Cindy. Turn 2, inking something, playing Smee. Next turn, playing a character singing Strength, and the turn after, we're going to Dock. So that's how we'll probably play out that hand. This hand, yikers. Okay, so this is a good example, again, of an awkward hand where we want to know how to mulligan, right? We have all these cards we can do. Play versus draw doesn't matter too much because we have a 2-drop in Smee already. The Calhoun loses a little bit of its luster. Matchup specific, if you're playing it's a mirror match, I'd probably keep the Calhoun going second and the Pete. So essentially, let's say we're playing a mirror match going second. I probably would do something like this, potentially even keeping the Storm. And the reason being is because on turn 3 you can Pete, turn 4 Sing with the Storm to kind of catch back up again. Going first, I would probably just do this in the unknown. Smee is, again, I think of the few cards on my no mulligan list in this deck, which the boxes do change when you have a 1-drop or not on that no mulligan list, which I don't quite have yet with certainty, of course, but I'll try to if I can figure it out. But Smee is probably one of the few cards on that list. Smee and Cinderella are probably the only 2 cards I can fathom right now that are on the don't mulligan ever list. Don't matter the matchup, don't mulligan it. Just because they're great. But yeah, so let's just say we're going first. Again, the importance of a 1-cost card, especially in the dark, I'd probably do something like this going first. Going second, I could again see something along the lines of this even, depending on the matchup, if this is a card that actually matters. Sometimes the Amethyst decks get around Calhoun just by going on the Genie plan and being able to do so going first. But yes, this is quite an aggressive mulligan if we're going to go first here. Looking for those 1s. We missed on the 1, which in a vacuum for full mulliganing, I think our odds are at 77% from that position to hit a 1. But blanket statement wise, to find a 1-cost card in 13 cards in your deck is around 97%. So pretty unfortunate mulligan. Honestly, we had double Doc and Rapunzel off of that. So this is going to be a tough game to win for sure. But probably Inkita, pass, and then maybe you have to ink the Rapunzel because we're going to use our Docs more than likely. Smee, and then maybe play a Doc out on 3 just to play a card and not use the ability. But who knows? Not a great hand. But maybe if we're going first, our first 2 draw steps might be help. Nope, no help. Never seen a 1-cost card. Who knows? But yeah, it's certainly an argument to add more 1-cost cards. I'm going to do one more hand here. I'm not going to do this hand. It's pretty uncompelling. This one has quite a few things. Let's imagine a scenario where we're playing. Again, I've harped so vigorously on how to play into Ruby Sapphire because I do think it'll be the most played deck. It is a very forgiving deck and very powerful deck and very capable of 2-0ing a lot of people. And you need to know how to make sure that you're mulliganing with the thought process of I'm playing against this deck that is very polarizing and my cards might not be as good as I want them to be. And other decks, I have a little bit more time to kind of mess around to make sure that I don't, or to make sure that I can still have a footing even going second. Ruby Sapphire doesn't really give you that footing. If they get to a point where they can stabilize and then drop a Tamatoa, there's nothing you can really do to fight that. Your goal with this deck is to make it so that they never get to play a Tamatoa, or if they do, they have to challenge with it, they're going to lose. So that's really what you're trying to do in that matchup. So let's just say playing against Ruby Sapphire and we're going first. My thoughts here, I want all my 1s since I have a triple 1-drop start or even a 1 into 2 into that, but I do kind of want to keep a Dwarven Mine. Just a brief aside on Dwarven Mine in the Ruby Sapphire matchup. It's not typically a great card, in all honesty. It does get checked by Maui, which I've actually seen some lists cutting down on Maui 5s, which has been a little bit nice to have a card stay in play. But what this card really does do is that the most dangerous card for this deck is Big Sisu. Sisu, an empowered sibling or whatever it is. And the way to make they make it the scariest is by playing it on turn 4, which they can do. My finals opponent did a really good job of making it horrifying for me, even when I was going first, and had triple Daisy start where I thought I could lose. They had Sail into Sail Sisu to take out a Daisy Duck, and then the next turn, if I didn't answer the Sisu immediately, they could just shift it. They'd have 5 ink and play that turn prior, going into their 6 ink turn, so I had to kill it. Seven Dwarfs Mine is somewhat insurance against that. It's going to be their turn 4 that action happens, so on your turn 4, you can play and move the mine in that scenario. It's not something I'm always going to keep in that matchup with that intent in mind. I may ink it on turn 1, depending on how the rest of my hand looks, or turn 2, or whatever it is. If it works out, I want to be as aggressive as I can, but in situations where they have that start, and not like a card like Brawl, which is more likely, I would say, than the small Sisu, but more than a Brawl, the Dwarven Mine can certainly help there. And it's something to be cognizant of, essentially holding until turn 4, if possible. Again, I wouldn't dote on it too much if you have to use it, because you do have 8 other removal spells along with 3 other mines potentially. But here's where I want to be. I'd like to see a couple ink maybe to be able to play Daisy into Piglet into Daisy +2. I don't really want Calhoun ever in that matchup. And yeah, we have this kind of start here. This is fine. I'm going to definitely be sticking to kind of what I said before, where I want to most likely ink the Cinderella, play Daisy. Turn 2, let's just say we draw another Storm. Much more likely to want to keep the Cinderella. So I'd ink mine, play Piglet, and then hopefully draw an ink to then go Daisy into Cindy into something else maybe. But this is fine. Again, similar to how Dwarven Mind can help stymie a small Sisu, the Storm Major can do the same thing. It's not as good all the time as Dwarven Mind, depending on the situation. If you can sing with Cinderella to play it, then it's fine. But yeah, it can be tricky. But this is a great start. All the ones, Daisy into Piglet's really hard to deal with when you're going first. They really have to have Brawl / Sisu, or they're just out. They're out of it. They're done. They're as the kids say, cooked. But yeah, that's been kind of some mulligans here. I had a ton of fun playing this deck, and certainly I'm looking forward to trying it out some more. It might be what I play for Continentals, I don't know. Kind of seeing how people react, and if there's any technology that can be built into the deck between now and then would be cool. I'm not entirely sure how that would look or what would happen other than shaving a number or two here, but as far as tech cards go, I've kind of explored pretty much everything. I had a list of like 20 cards I was attempting to put into this deck as 1 or 2 ofs to fill certain roles and for certain slots, kind of going back to the the removal, offense, defense, and card draw plan, seeing if I can add more points to certain things that may overlap better. But this is where I was at, and this is what I got. This is what I think, Continentals is tomorrow, playing this deck. That's the end of it. But we still have 3 weeks, and the LCQs are best of 3, which this was. I think this deck is fantastic for best of 3. I think Amber Steel in general is significantly better for best of 3 than it is for best of 2, just because it gets to know what it's playing against in one of the games. It has to go second potentially. If it has to go second twice, it gets to know what it's playing against. And that's always a huge benefit, because this deck mulligans really well when you get to know what you're playing against, to piece things together. Having to speculate whether or not you keep Storm and Cindy is really rough. I would pretty much err on the side of you have to, but I don't like it, because it can be awkward if you're playing against the wrong matchup or if you're playing against Ursula. So hard to know. But yeah, that's been this deck. Hopefully this helped out a bit here. I am going to be going over more of the decks that we've seen from that event and the event itself. I want to do a recording and explanation of some of the plays in the coming days, if not early next week. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this. I will talk to you all again soon, and good luck out there. Have a great holiday.